Canada, a country often praised for its honesty, fairness, and good government. A nation where corruption is something that happens elsewhere. But behind the maple leaves and polite smiles lies a history the textbooks rarely dwell on. A history of backroom deals, bribery, and betrayal that stretches all the way back to the birth of Confederation. Because as long as there's been power in Ottawa, someone has tried to profit from it. This is the untold story of Canada's biggest political scandals and how, time after time, those in power prove that even in the Great White North, no one is above temptation. It began, fittingly, with a promise to unite the country. In 1871, Prime Minister Sir John A. Macdonald announced an ambitious dream, a transcontinental railway that would bind the young Dominion of Canada from coast to coast. A railway so vast it would become the backbone of the nation and the greatest public project in its history. But behind the patriotic speeches, money was changing hands. A wealthy shipping magnate named Hugh Allen wanted in. His company was one of several bidding for the contract to build the railway worth millions. But soon evidence surfaced that Allen had secretly donated over $350,000, an astronomical sum at the time, to Macdonald's Conservative Party to fund their election campaign. In return, he was quietly promised control of the railway. When a series of telegrams leaked to the press, the story exploded. The public was outraged. The opposition accused Macdonald of selling Canada's future to private interests. Cornered, exhausted, and reeking of guilt, Macdonald finally admitted, "I have been guilty of a great indiscretion." In 1873, he resigned, marking Canada's first ever major political scandal. But the Pacific scandal was more than a story of bribery. It was the moment Canadians realized that corruption could reach the very top. And as the nation grew richer and more industrialized, the line between politics and profit would only blur further. The 1930s were a time of desperation. The Great Depression had crippled the economy, unemployment was soaring, and Canadians were losing faith in their leaders. In that chaos, corporations began to whisper offers that politicians could barely resist. One of those corporations was the Beauharnois Power Company. It wanted permission to build a massive hydroelectric dam on the St. Lawrence River, a project that would flood farmlands and alter navigation routes. When the Liberal government approved it, locals were stunned. It seemed impossible that the project had passed environmental and safety objections so easily. The truth emerged soon after. The company had secretly donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Liberal Party of Canada, money funneled through hidden accounts and party insiders. When the scandal broke, it exposed a network of political favors that reached to the very top. Although no one was criminally charged, the damage was done. Canadians had learned that even in a democracy, influence could be bought if you knew the right people. But as the decades went on, money wasn't the only thing that could bring down a government. Sometimes it was love, lies, and national security. The 1960s were an age of secrets. The Cold War had turned paranoia into policy, and in Ottawa, loyalty was everything. So when the name Gerda Munsinger surfaced, Canada's political elite panicked. She was a German immigrant, beautiful, mysterious, and as it turned out, the former mistress of several federal cabinet ministers. But Munsinger wasn't just a socialite. Intelligence agencies suspected she had ties to Soviet spies, and that her relationships could have compromised national security. The story first broke in the late 1950s but was hushed up. Years later, in 1966, it resurfaced, igniting a political firestorm that humiliated the government. One minister's career ended overnight. Another fled the country. Canada had its first major sex scandal, and the timing couldn't have been worse. It shattered public faith in the supposedly moral image of its leaders. By the 1980s, Canada's scandals had become less about romance and more about cold, hard cash. When Brian Mulroney swept into office in 1984, he promised to restore integrity and rebuild trust. But before long, whispers began again. This time about international contracts, lobbyists, and secret payments. The key figure was Karl-Heinz Schreiber, an arms lobbyist and fixer who had deep ties in both Europe and Ottawa. In the late 1980s, Air Canada, then a Crown corporation, purchased dozens of Airbus jets. Years later, evidence surfaced that Schreiber had paid kickbacks connected to the deal, and that some of those funds may have gone to Mulroney himself. Mulroney denied everything, but then came a revelation. After leaving office, he had accepted $225,000 in cash, handed over in envelopes from Schreiber during private meetings in hotel rooms. He called it a consulting fee. Canadians called it corruption. The Oliphant inquiry years later didn't find proof of criminal wrongdoing, but the scandal destroyed Mulroney's reputation and became a symbol of the shady lobbying culture that had taken root in Ottawa. By the turn of the millennium, Canada's scandals weren't just about individuals. They were about entire systems built on misuse of public money. In the 1990s, Canada faced a crisis unlike any other. Quebec had come within a single percentage point of voting to leave the country. To win back hearts and minds, Prime Minister Jean Chrétien's Liberal government launched what seemed like a noble idea, a sponsorship program to promote Canadian unity. But behind the maple leaf banners and smiling ads, a darker truth was hiding. Millions of taxpayer dollars were secretly funneled to liberal-friendly ad firms in Quebec. These companies billed for events that never happened, submitted fake invoices, and kicked back portions of the money to party insiders. It was a cycle of corruption dressed up as patriotism. When the scandal broke, it rocked the country. The Gomery inquiry exposed a system of political favoritism that had siphoned over $100 million from public funds. The Liberals' reputation collapsed. Canadians, once proud of their global image of clean governance, felt betrayed. In 2006, the Liberals lost power, a direct casualty of their own corruption. But the fall of one government didn't mean the end of scandal, only the start of new ones. By the 2000s, Canadians had grown cynical, wondering whether their leaders ever learned. Then came the Senate expense scandal, proving that even the upper chamber wasn't immune to greed. It started with a single senator, Mike Duffy, a former TV journalist turned political appointee. He was accused of claiming tens of thousands of dollars in housing and travel expenses for a home he didn't actually live in. Soon others, Pamela Wallin and Patrick Brazeau, were implicated too. The real shock came when it was revealed that Nigel Wright, Prime Minister, Stephen Harper's chief of staff, had secretly cut Duffy a personal check for $90,000 to repay the expenses. The Prime Minister's office denied involvement, but the damage was done. The story became a symbol of insider privilege, secrecy, and the blurred lines between politics and ethics. When Justin Trudeau swept into power in 2015, promising transparency and reform, Canadians hoped the pattern had finally broken. But history has a habit of repeating itself. It began quietly, a criminal case involving SNC-Lavalin, one of Canada's largest engineering firms, accused of paying bribes to officials in Libya. But soon the scandal reached the highest levels of government. Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould alleged that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office had pressured her to intervene, to stop the prosecution and offer the company a deferred settlement instead. When she refused, she was demoted. Then she resigned. The nation watched as the government's promise of integrity unraveled on live television. A damning report from the Ethics Commissioner concluded that Trudeau had indeed violated conflict of interest rules, though he kept his job. To many, it confirmed what they had long suspected. Even the most progressive leaders can bend the rules when powerful corporations are involved. But it wouldn't be the last time Trudeau's team would face questions about who benefits most from government generosity. In 2020, the world was paralyzed by the COVID-19 pandemic, and the Canadian government rushed to help struggling citizens. Among its initiatives was a massive student volunteer grant program meant to pay young Canadians for community service. The problem? The $900 million contract was handed to WE Charity, an organization with deep personal ties to the Trudeau family. Trudeau's mother, brother, and wife had all been paid to appear at WE events. When that detail came to light, the deal collapsed almost overnight. An ethics investigation followed, and though Trudeau once again avoided criminal charges, his credibility took another major hit. The pattern was undeniable. Promises of accountability followed by scandals of favoritism. But scandals don't just happen in the Prime Minister's office. They can erupt anywhere in Ottawa, from misused pandemic funds to foreign interference. During the pandemic, the government launched the ArriveCan app, designed to track travelers' health and border status. What was supposed to cost $80,000 ballooned into over $54 million. much of it paid to outside contractors for unclear work. Investigations revealed that some of those firms received contracts without open bidding, and in several cases, subcontractors were paid millions for doing almost nothing. The story became a symbol of bureaucratic waste and lack of oversight, another example of how public funds can vanish when accountability is buried under layers of red tape. And while Ottawa tried to manage the pandemic, another storm was quietly brewing, one that struck at the very heart of democracy itself. In 2023, reports emerged that foreign governments, particularly China, had allegedly interfered in Canada's federal elections, influencing nominations, funding candidates, and shaping narratives. Intelligence leaks suggested that senior officials knew about it and may have downplayed the threat. The revelations triggered a public inquiry, exposing a web of secrecy and hesitation within Canada's intelligence and political systems. Though the investigation continues, one truth has already emerged. Even in a democracy built on trust, transparency is never guaranteed. For over 150 years, Canada's governments have promised reform. And yet, generation after generation, new scandals take their place. From the Pacific scandal to the WE charity affair, Canada's history is littered with lessons about power, privilege, and the fragile line between service and self-interest. Each scandal, in its own way, has tested the country's belief that its leaders can be trusted. But here's the irony. Every time Canadians uncover corruption, they demand accountability, and in that demand lies hope. Because perhaps what defines Canada isn't the absence of scandal, it's the willingness to confront it. Canada's dark past isn't over, but knowing it is the first step towards something brighter.